We have wonderful senior fellows who are at the forefront of their areas in economics, in education, in technology and governance. And what really has been terrific is to see the collaborative spirit of these senior fellows.
I'm joined as usual by the three stars of our show, who we call the Good Fellows. That would be the economist John Cochrane, the historian Neil Ferguson, the geostrategist Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. Today, here by very popular demand, you've begged for him, you pleaded for him, you've beseeched for him. Here he is live and in person, the one and only Stephen Kotkin.
It's great to be here, Bill. Thank you for the invitation.
We got curious. You know China very well. Neil does, HR, John studies it as well. What message was Xi trying to send to both his people and the world by committing this very public act of humiliation?
Yeah, it was quite the incident. He committed the act already by the personnel he purged from the higher bodies and the ones he included in the higher bodies. That had been pre-decided, and so it was a done deal.
How do you think about Russia after Putin? Could you share with our viewers, we would like to do that. How do you think about Russia after Putin?
I have a deep, profound belief in my people. I see great potential in the Russian nation. It will be free, it will be normal, it will be obedient to international rules and norms, and will be peaceful and have good relations with everybody. We will see it in our lifetime. And knowing that, my people are good. Russians are good. I will never stop doing anything I can to achieve that, and I'm sure this is possible.
Senator, American politics has become permanently cruder, and nice guys can no longer finish first. The gentlemen are gone.
I just respectfully disagree. I don't believe that it's as easy as it used to be, because there is more partisanship and kind of shirts and skins. But as I said a moment ago, I think our goal as a country ought to be to figure out, we're going to have different political views, and we're going to have different views on cultural issues, but how do we come together and move the country forward?
This is, as I suggested, at least from our perspective, a competition to shape what comes next after this post-Cold War period. What does it look like? Whose values are going to be reflected in what we do? And from our perspective, at least, we have a basic choice, because we find, and I think this has been evident especially over the period since the Second World War, the world doesn't organize itself. And for the United States, the choice is this. If we're not playing a part in the organizing, if we're not taking a leadership role in that, then one of two things. Either someone else is, and it may well be China, and they're, again, probably not in a way that fully reflects our interests and values, or maybe just as bad, no one's doing it. And then you tend to have vacuums that get filled with bad things before they get filled with good things.
I started on September 10th, 2001. On my second day, I evacuated the George Shultz National Foreign Affairs Training Center when it became clear that America was under attack. The world changed that day, and with it, the future of diplomacy. The post-Cold War peace of the 1990s was over, and the war on terror had begun. The Department of State's mission is to lead American foreign policy through diplomacy, advocacy, and assistance.
The Chinese Communist Party combines overt propaganda and covert tactics to manipulate information and to promote its preferred narratives both at home and abroad. Party leaders are eager to shape international opinion. They regularly project positive images of China to an international audience on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, networks they block within China. They minimize negative coverage about sensitive issues like Taiwan, Hong Kong, or COVID-19, and mobilize actors abroad to amplify those interventions. At home, the party's control is more overt and intensive. In 2016, China's President Xi Jinping forced editors and reporters at the three largest state-run media companies to pledge absolute loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party, and internet regulators have blocked a growing list of foreign news websites.
Putin, like all dictators, is threatened by democratic ideas, democratic governments, and democratic believers. Putin fears democratic expansion, not NATO expansion. And that is certainly true regarding Ukraine today. Putin can't tolerate a successful and democratic Ukraine on Russia's borders, especially if the Ukrainian people also begin to prosper economically. That would undermine the Kremlin's own regime's stability and proposed rationale for autocracy. Just as Putin cannot allow the Russian people to guide Russia's future, he cannot allow the people of Ukraine to realize the prosperous, independent, and free future that they have voted for and now tragically are fighting for.
That this was not a recession as we've seen in the past. This was a reduction in the human capital and the learning of our society and the skills that we will see throughout the remainder of the century. Importantly, these losses are permanent if we don't, in fact, address them and do better than we did in the past. If we just return our schools to where they were in January of 2020, these are permanent losses. This cohort is permanently damaged. Our society is permanently damaged by the lower economic growth and GDP that we can expect throughout the remainder of the century.
I think one of the things that's foundational to liberalism, broadly defined, is the idea that we can make amends, the idea that we can reinvent ourselves, the idea that we're not held hostage by the worst mistake we've ever said or did.
This is a country of second acts. That's really part of the old-fashioned classical liberal outlook.
I really believe that. Now, what do you do with that outlook when all of a sudden you are living not even with, more and more inside a technology in which everything you've ever uttered is captured forever?
Central bank digital currency. China has one, the US needs one. It's not that simple. This is not a space race. Who's going to come up with a digital currency first? Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell said over a year ago, it's not about being first, it's about getting it right. And we strongly endorse that in our recommendations. We think that the United States government, acting on its own behalf, needs to move on multiple fronts, both domestically and internationally. And it starts at the White House. We need a plan. The US government needs to set forth a plan for what it's going to do with its future digital economy, how central bank digital currencies, how private digital currencies, and how international principles can be set so as to improve the life of Americans when they need to make payments and when they need to protect their security and their privacy.
How do we measure achievement gaps and learning trends for young Americans? The answer is a test that you may never have heard of. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, called NAEP, but better known as the nation's report card. NAEP has been around since Lyndon Johnson was in the White House. Today, it tests school children in grades 4, 8, and 12 across 10 subjects. It tests a random sample of about 100 schools per state and about 50 students per school, just enough to yield valid data. For reading and math, it delivers results every 2 years, yielding data for the whole country, for every state, and for more than 24 cities.
In a nearly unanimous vote, our Congress approved this national holiday. National holidays speak to our values, but that only works if it's turned into action. So I'll start this time with Condi, move to Carolyn, and then back to Shelby.
Yeah, I just think, as I said a little bit in my opening remarks, I think it's recognition that America's democracy, which I will state unequivocally, I've been all over the world, is the envy of the world in terms of democracy, because whatever problems we have, we actually have dealt better with difference, I think, than any other place that I've ever been.
I've been arguing for a really long time that the West is unbelievably powerful, that the West has all the institutions, all the human capital, all the technology, all the power, and yet it doesn't understand that. Here we are in the West, and we're talking about how we're in decline. We're talking about how transatlanticism isn't necessary or doesn't work anymore. We're talking about how flabby NATO is. We're talking about how we can't teach Western Civ at our universities because it's just too much a story of genocide and other crimes. We're flagellating ourselves for years about the rise of China, about the supposed rise of a multipolar world, and all other stuff which turns out to be nonsense. It turns out that the West is unbelievably powerful. It just needed to remember that. It turned out that the United States is a superpower. It just needed to remember that.
It's our great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual tour of the exhibition, Fanning the Flames, Propaganda in Modern Japan. As we enter the exhibition gallery, we are confronted by the introduction wall, which features heroic Captain Higuchi rescuing a Chinese infant from the battlefield of the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895. This is a detail taken from a woodblock print by Mizuno Toshikata. It sets the mood and the tone as we enter this new experience and begin to learn about visual propaganda in Japan, which appealed to the masses as accessible and affordable during the era of the Empire of Japan. From the vast collections at Hoover, we have chosen the Japanese popular arts because of their powerful visual messaging capabilities to offer you an opportunity to re-examine propaganda.
My judgment, at least for the rest of this decade, is that neither the United States nor China want a war over Taiwan, because they have both looked into that abyss. They've stared over the edge and said that's a long way down, and it contains within it a whole bunch of unknowable risks. So therefore, the challenge for the 2020s, in my judgment, is this: how do you reduce the risk of war by accident? And that is what managed strategic competition is all about. It provides guardrails, the term I use, strategic guardrails, around these 5 strategic red lines, and a framework for the rest of the dimensions of the relationship.
A couple of months later, how's it going?
It's going great. Something that I'm very excited about now, our new Center for the Revitalization of American Institutions. We were bequeathed by the founders extraordinary institutions, a constitution that for more than 230 years now has been a vehicle through which Americans have been able to exercise their desires, to deal with their fears. And yet we know that those institutions are under attack these days. Those who say, well, they're not worthy because they were the institutions that supported and sustained slavery. Well, they're also the institutions that freed slaves. Americans understand that that Constitution's almost their personal protector. And it really doesn't matter what station in life you came from, that Constitution is there for you. So somehow we have to rekindle Americans' belief in their institutions, their confidence in their institutions, in their elections, in their judiciary,